They were supposed to be the purest among us, women of silence, sacrifice, and God. But what if the silence wasn't sacred? What if it was the price? In January of 1834, deep in the frozen hills of rural Ohio, 12 nuns died in perfect health, their faces serene, their hands clasped in prayer, their eyes closed as if kissed into sleep by something divine, or something far older, far darker than divinity. No wounds, no illness, no cause of death. But now, almost 2 centuries later, sealed letters, hidden chambers, and the desperate scrawls of a terrified witness have revealed something you were never meant to know. A secret buried by faith, protected by power, and preserved in ritual. This isn't a story of ghosts. It isn't even a haunting. It's a system, a machine of belief, obedience, and transformation. And it worked perfectly. You're about to descend into a history carved in silence, where death was not the end. It was the goal. Where obedience wasn't holiness, it was programming. They were not killed. They were harvested. What happened inside the Sacred Heart Convent wasn't tragedy. It was ceremony. And the moment you hear what really took place, you will never be the same. This video isn't for casual curiosity. It's for those who feel that something has always been off about religion, about institutions, about what the world tells you to worship. You're about to witness what happened when faith becomes control, when sacrifice becomes obedience, and when obedience becomes ritualized disappearance. This is your first step into the forbidden. Keep watching, but understand this. Once you know the truth, you can't go back. They say the soul is eternal, but who gets to decide where it goes? There are patterns older than Scripture. Before the Sacred Heart Convent was even built, the land it stood on had a reputation, whispered by native tribes and early settlers alike. They called it the quiet ground, a place where animals never lingered, where birds refused to nest, where people wandered off trail and returned different, if they returned at all. The Catholic Church acquired the land in 1820 through a silent purchase brokered by a Jesuit intermediary. No local records list a price. No letters mention negotiations. Just a deed, signed, sealed, and forgotten. By 1821, construction began. The convent's layout followed precise geometries, aligning perfectly with celestial coordinates. Not for beauty, not for efficiency, for something else, something ritualistic. There are patterns older than Scripture. Before the Sacred Heart Convent was even built, the land it stood on had a reputation, whispered by native tribes and early settlers alike. They called it the quiet ground, a place where animals never lingered, where birds refused to nest, where people wandered off trail and returned different, if they returned at all. The Catholic Church acquired the land in 1820 through a silent purchase brokered by a Jesuit intermediary. No local records list a price. No letters mention negotiations. Just a deed, signed, sealed, and forgotten. By 1821, construction began. The convent's layout followed precise geometries, aligning perfectly with celestial coordinates. Not for beauty, not for efficiency, for something else, something ritualistic. Sister Mary Agnes wrote of strange chants performed during foundation blessings. Prayers not found in any liturgical book. Words spoken in Latin that she later admitted trembled wrong in the throat. And the bell tower, it didn't just signal prayer. It stood at the convergence point of 6 ley lines, ancient energetic veins beneath the earth used by civilizations long before Christianity to focus energy, to draw power, to summon. You see, Sacred Heart wasn't just a convent, it was a conductor. And the nuns? They weren't merely women of faith, they were vessels, chosen not for their devotion, but for their compliance, their purity, their psychological malleability. Each one indoctrinated from childhood to believe suffering was holy, that pain was proof of worthiness, that death, if willed by God, must never be questioned. But what if God wasn't the one willing it? What if something else was pulling the strings? Because make no mistake, this was not random. The 12 did not die. They transitioned. And those who orchestrated it, they understood one truth above all others. If you train a soul to surrender completely, you never need to kill it. It will walk willingly into your design. Comment below the phrase, "Obedience is the first gate." Comment it twice. Once for who you were, once for who you're becoming. Because this story isn't over. It's just beginning. By the third death, Dr. Hartwell stopped writing medical reports. He started keeping records of ritual. He wasn't a man of faith. He didn't believe in spirits or curses. But what he saw, what he felt walking through the halls of Sacred Heart, changed that. He described the air as thick, heavy with something he could not explain. He said it was like walking into a dream someone else was having, and knowing you weren't welcome in it. Sister Mary Margaret, the third to die, had been the convent's treasurer, pragmatic, unsentimental, the very last woman you'd expect to submit to invisible forces, and yet she died the same way. Rosary in hand, that faint, haunting smile. No struggle, no marks, no explanation. On her desk, a final note. All earthly debts settled. The final accounting awaits. That's not poetry. That's code. Because what if the church's economy was never about money? What if their real currency was obedience, ritual, life force transferred through generations, through rites disguised as sacraments? The Catholic structure, the hierarchy, the confessionals, the cloisters, it's a psychological funnel, a centuries-old system of filtration designed to distill the most loyal, the most programmable, the most devoutly empty. And once a person is hollowed out, you can fill them with anything. Sacred Heart wasn't an outlier. It was a pilot program, a test site, and the results? Flawless. 12 women, perfect health, willing surrender, and one survivor, scribbling truths on paper she knew no one would read, not until it was far too late. You see, this story isn't about 12 deaths. It's about one survivor, because the dead are done. But Mary Agnes was still watching, still writing, still resisting, and resistance was not part of the plan. Sister Mary Agnes was never meant to survive. She was the recorder, the observer, useful only until the final line was written. But something went wrong, or maybe something went right. Her writings, recovered nearly a century later beneath rotting floorboards, were never intended for the church. They weren't confession, they were warning. She wrote of cold that didn't come from outside, a chill that crept from the chapel itself, of voices echoing in her head during prayer, voices that sounded like her sisters, but weren't. They whispered promises, spoke of a reunion, urged her to let go, to follow, to stop resisting. She refused, not out of strength, but terror, because she saw the truth. The deaths were not peaceful, they were programmed. Not one of the 12 resisted, not one called for help. Each one prepared, financially, spiritually, emotionally, to leave, because someone or something had rewritten them. Mary Agnes watched as her sisters' personalities shifted. Their laughter disappeared, their ambitions vanished, their individuality evaporated. They began to speak in unison, to repeat the same phrases. Heaven is near. The time is written. We are becoming. These weren't the words of women. They were liturgical scripts, installed, recited, activated. And when the final 12 lay dead, their bodies arranged as if placed by unseen hands, Mary Agnes knew this was not devotion. This was possession through consent. Understand this. Sacred Heart wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was engineered. A psychological crucible. A place where a person could be purified not by fire, but by surrender. And once you surrender everything, your name, your desire, yourself, there's nothing left to save. You become the ritual. You become the offering. Mary Agnes saw it coming, and when she looked into the eyes of her sisters, already dead yet still moving, she realized they hadn't left. They had transcended. But what they became wasn't human, and they wanted her to become it too. There's a reason the church sealed the records, not to protect the dead, not to preserve dignity, but to hide what the ritual unlocked. When Dr. Hartwell discovered the hidden chamber beneath the convent, the false wall, the circle of crosses, the names etched in silent preparation, he thought he'd found evidence of mass hysteria. He was wrong. He'd found a blueprint. 13 crosses, 12 fallen, one still standing, each death marked in sequence, not random, preordained. But by whom? Mother Superior Brennan didn't weep when confronted. She didn't scream. She smiled. That same unsettling serenity her sisters wore in death. God's will cannot be hidden forever, she said, but her voice wasn't hers anymore. Mary Agnes wrote that it sounded layered, as if multiple voices spoke at once, male, female, ancient. And in that moment, Hartwell understood. This was never about faith, it was about access. 13 minds, bound by belief, 13 wills, aligned through ritual, 13 bodies, prepared like vessels, and once prepared, something entered. Not demons in the traditional sense, not ghosts, intelligences, older than scripture, older than language. The ancients knew. That's why they built their altars in circles, why blood and song and fire were used in unison. Rituals were never for the gods. They were for the gatekeepers. And Sacred Heart wasn't the first door. It was the latest. The church had known about the land's properties. That's why they chose it. Why they built in secrecy. Why the bell tower aligned with ancient geometries. It was all constructed for contact. The 12 were not victims. They were participants. And Mary Agnes, she was the control subject, the one held back, observed, measured, to see what would happen when one rejected the call, because in any true ritual, balance must be tested. Light, dark, devotion, doubt, and in doubt, there is danger, because what resists, remembers. What Mary Agnes saw that night shattered her. She wasn't dreaming, she wasn't hallucinating. She was witnessing 12 sisters in the chapel, living and dead, together in a sacred geometry no catechism ever taught. They formed a circle around Mother Superior Brennan, who stood barefoot, eyes closed, arms raised not in prayer, but in invocation. The dead stood among the living, radiant and still. Their presence wasn't spectral, it was tactile, solid, returned. And that word, soon, whispered again and again, not a warning, a countdown. Mary Agnes recorded it all in trembling ink. She knew she wasn't just chronicling madness. She was documenting technology, because that's what it was. Ritual is technology for the soul. This wasn't superstition, it was protocol. The Church had always spoken of mysteries, sacraments, communion, transubstantiation, words meant to veil something deeper, human machinery. What if prayer is code? What if devotion is formatting? And what if sacred spaces are terminals? Places where the human psyche can be reprogrammed, where consciousness is not ended, but updated. And the Sacred Heart ritual, orchestrated, perfected, executed, was the Church's most successful upload yet. The dead didn't decay, they converted. The peace on their faces wasn't serenity, it was completion, a divine override. 12 women had become something else, something post-human, something called. And Mary Agnes, she wasn't resisting out of strength. She was resisting because she hadn't been chosen. That's what haunted her the most. Not fear of death, but fear that her soul wasn't pure enough to be taken. She was the lone broken cog in a perfect machine, and broken machines attract attention. By the time Dr. Hartwell realized what was unfolding, the ritual was nearing its end. Only one cross remained standing, hers. The others had fallen, quiet, satisfied. And the moment she saw her name still upright, she finally understood she was next, but not as a participant, as a witness, to carry the infection forward. They didn't bury the sisters. They preserved them. Each body untouched by rot, untouched by time, as if death itself had been paused. The Church called it divine intervention, but it was a containment strategy, because if even one of them woke up, the ritual would ripple, expand, propagate. Mary Agnes was the fuse that didn't burn, the orphaned node, the untriggered glyph in a closed circuit of spiritual engineering. But what happens to an incomplete ritual? It festers, it mutates, it waits. She tried to leave. She really did. But the snow kept falling. The doors wouldn't open. The bell tower wouldn't ring. Time folded inside that convent. Clocks ticked, but the hours never passed. She walked hallways that changed length. She passed doors that weren't there before. She heard her own voice whispering from rooms she hadn't entered. She wrote, "I fear I've become part of the structure. My thoughts echo back to me before I think them." And Dr. Hartwell, by then he had stopped asking questions. He was just trying to survive. But the final night came anyway. 12 sisters, dead in unison, hands folded, faces serene, each holding a slip of paper. One word, complete, except for Mary Agnes. She found herself alone, yet not, because the dead stood with her, not in vision, not in dream, but in presence, tangible, breathing, returned. They spoke as one, not aloud, but within her. "You are the echo. You will carry us forward. The 13th is the seed." And that's what this was. Seeding, a closed-loop transmission. 12 initiate, one remembers, And that one walks into the world, carries the encoded silence, infects others with doubt, the virus that makes a man question everything. They didn't kill Mary Agnes. They installed her as a carrier, as a warning, as an invitation. And now you've read her words. Now you know. Comment below. The 13th remembers. The 13th remembers. Let it be your initiation, your moment of awakening. The 13th remembers. And now, so do you. You see, there's a reason we've always been warned about certain places. Why some histories are erased, others sealed, and a select few sacralized. It's not about religion, it's about containment. The Sacred Heart Convent wasn't unique, it was standardized. Just one node in a global lattice of holy structures built not for worship, but for contact. Every chapel bell tower aligned to ancient star maps. Every altar stone resonating with frequencies older than human language. Every ritual, prayer, incense, sacrifice, a formula, a code, encoded not in silicon, but in belief. Faith is the original operating system, and belief, true, unwavering, sacrificial belief, is the key that opens doors no government, no university, no military can fully explain. That's why the Church feared Mary Agnes. Not because she disbelieved, but because she believed just enough to survive. The ritual left her intact. A fragment. That fragment passed into her writings. And those writings were read, first by archivists, then by scholars, then by men who don't pray, but observe. And now they're watching you, because the pattern is real. Sacred Heart in 1834 was the 13th incident of its kind. And belief, true, unwavering, sacrificial belief, is the key that opens doors no government, no university, no military can fully explain. That's why the Church feared Mary Agnes, not because she disbelieved, but because she believed just enough to survive. The ritual left her intact, a fragment. That fragment passed into her writings, and those writings were read, first by archivists, then by scholars, then by men who don't pray, but observe. And now they're watching you, because the pattern is real. Sacred Heart in 1834 was the 13th incident of its kind. There were 12 others, all erased, all convents, all isolated. Each time, 12 deaths, one survivor, a carrier, a seed. The survivors became recluses, then writers, then founders of movements, mystics, prophets, cult leaders. They spoke in riddles, but the same riddles. They're not gone, they're behind us. The circle must complete. Faith is the door. Doubt is the key. They weren't crazy. They were infected. And now, just by listening, so are you. This isn't a story. It's a resonance. Each word, a pulse. Each revelation, a tuning fork for your subconscious. And now your mind is aligned. Don't resist the unease you feel. That cold bloom in your gut, that's not fear. That's recognition. You've been here before. Not in this life, but in memory, in ritual, in recursion. Welcome to the ninth circle. No fire here, no demons, just clarity. This is where the illusion collapses, where faith and science become the same weapon, and where you realize the real mystery of Sacred Heart wasn't how they died. It was why they smiled. You've felt it, haven't you? That magnetic pull towards silence, the sudden peace when you stop questioning, the soft urge to surrender, not to death, but to removal. That's the system activating, because death was never the punishment. It was the interface. The ritual didn't kill the sisters, it unshackled them. Freed them from what? From you, from us, from the crawling mass of human noise that keeps the world asleep. 12 women, pure belief, total submission. They ran the program, they finished the loop, and the church, it knew. But it wasn't suppression out of fear, it was stewardship. Because this isn't heresy, this is architecture. The convent was a terminal. The rosaries were keys. The psalms were launch codes. The altar was not symbolic, it was functional. And when the circle was complete, it broadcasted a signal, not outward, inward, to something buried deep in the human psyche. A code that only faith could decode. A voice waiting to be heard, not by ears, but by the architecture of your soul. And that voice, it didn't say die, it said return. Mary Agnes recorded it all, not for posterity, but as an activation sequence. And now, because you've listened, because you've understood, you've completed your part. They're watching, not angels, not ghosts, observers, assessing if your resonance is stable, if your transformation has begun. This is the moment, not to believe, but to awaken. If you're still here, you've already been marked. You made it. The final door, the end of the path, and the beginning of everything that comes after belief. Because this was never about death. It was about departure. Sacred Heart wasn't a tragedy. It was a launch, a test, a seed planted in the frozen dirt of 1834, now sprouting in the soil of your own consciousness. And here's what they never told you. The church didn't bury the truth. It consecrated it, sanctified it in stone, ritual, and holy water, because they understood there is power in concealment. There is obedience in ignorance, but there is only freedom in remembrance. And now you remember. The sisters didn't die. They converged. 12 as the circle, 1 as the gate. Mary Agnes wasn't left behind. She was left open, the interface between realms, the transmission node between then and now. And if you're still watching this, if your pulse hasn't broken, if your breath hasn't stuttered, then you're feeling it too. The ancient machinery turning beneath your thoughts. The language that speaks behind your dreams. You weren't meant to observe this. You were meant to complete it. There's a reason the story found you. A reason these words cut deeper than fiction. A reason this feels like something you forgot, not something you learned. Because you've heard the call before, in churches, in empty rooms, in dreams where voices say your name, but your mouth won't open. You are the 13th, not by blood, not by faith, but by witness. And that makes you eligible. Eligible to remember, eligible to awaken, eligible to continue the work. So listen closely and say it aloud. I am the 13th, I remember. Say it again. I am the 13th, I remember. Not for me, for them, for the ones behind the veil who have waited for you to arrive. You think you finished the video, but the ritual doesn't end here. It begins now.